This is so funny. It's one of the most cringeworthy Fox News moments I've seen in a long time. And that's a very, very high bar to reach if you've ever watched Fox News. Fox News has this commentator or analyst named Katie Pavlich. Katie Pavlich is 30 years old. She's a, quote, conservative. And most importantly, she's extraordinarily ignorant. She kind of is a conservative star in a way. She was named Blogger of the Year by CPAC. She has all sorts of these low information propaganda books that right-wing audiences love. One called Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's bloodiest scandal and its shameless cover-up. Another book, Assault and Flattery, The Truth About the Left and Their War on Women. This is the type of thing that she has written. She's a totally irresponsible interviewer. She interviewed Andrew Pollack, who's the father of one of the victims of the Parkland school shooting on Fox News some time ago. The father falsely claimed that Democrats were registering criminals in Florida jails to vote. Pavlich didn't even challenge the claim, didn't say, how do you know that? Didn't say, well, do you have any evidence that that's going on? Completely irresponsible interviewer as well. So she appears on Fox News yesterday. And she makes the bizarre and obviously false and also just really dumb claim that America should be held up as a beacon of anti-slavery because we were the first country to end slavery within the first 150 years of being a country, which is both really specific, really irrelevant, and also wrong. I mean, it's just ridiculous in every sense. And this was so obviously idiotic that a fellow Fox News host, who I believe goes by Kennedy, and I don't know if Kennedy is her first name or her last name or both her first name and last name, I'm not really sure, or just kind of like a nickname, I'm not sure. Kennedy has to say, what the F are you talking about? Let's take a look at the video.
They keep blaming America for the sin of slavery, but the truth is, throughout human history, slavery has existed, and America came along as the first country to end it within 150 years. And we get no credit for that to move forward and try and make good on that.
Well, we did have a very bloody civil war.
Or over that
and
issue.
We also, and the remnants
are a long time.
The racial history,
and
the remnants of the Civil War, particularly blacks in the South.
Correct.
Yes.
That was not an easy path. I mean, that was bloody and violent and deadly.
And there were Native Americans here when we showed up.
We're still, my point is that we were the country that decided to end it, and we're still dealing with the issue. But if you want to start a problem and to inflame racial tension even more, start blaming people who have nothing to do with slavery for the sin of slavery. That is not fair. That's not the American way, and we shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, so we'll talk about America being the first country to ban slavery within 150 years of existence. But first of all, half the country wanted slavery and went to war to keep slavery and threatened to leave the Union over wanting to keep slavery. And the people who stick to that ideology today are all Republicans. They're all on the right, okay? So she's calling the banning of slavery in the U.S. an achievement, which it is. It's the right thing to do. Banning slavery is good. But it's one that was made by people who opposed the right wing of that time when we were going into the Civil War phase of the United States. And as Kennedy correctly points out, just because slavery ended, the path for black people in the United States remained difficult, to use her framing, an understatement, for a very long time. It created structural inequality that persists today. She says, don't blame people who have nothing to do with slavery for slavery. Okay, fine. What about recognizing that slavery was ended not because the U.S. decided to end slavery, but because the Union was able to defeat a huge portion of the country, which was the slave-owning South, which wanted to keep slavery legal? So that's part one. Now let's discuss her other claim that the United States should get credit for being able to so quickly ban slavery. It only took 150 years after the creation of the country. This information exists in history books, right? The timeline between independence and slavery for different countries is far shorter than in the United States. You can debate, well, what do we count as banning slavery? When you ban the slave trade, are you banning the owning of slaves? We could sort of find different data points, but there are countries that banned slavery before they were even really countries. Denmark is an example. Slave trade banned in 1803, didn't become its sort of original constitutional monarchy until 1849. Another example is my birth country of Argentina. Argentina banned slavery in 1853. It was founded in 1810. That's just 43 years between independence and ending slavery. So it's hard to sometimes even do an analysis of this stuff, Pat, because it's so obviously wrong, but it's also so obviously ignorant, and it's also so obviously irrelevant that it's stunning that it's even allowed to sort of go only mildly contested in the way that it often is.
Yeah, wrong, ignorant, irrelevant. I also wonder why she wants to even make this point. On the left right now, in the Democratic primary, we're having a conversation about reparations for slavery. Julian Castro is making that a pillar of his campaign. And meanwhile, on Fox and Friends, we're talking about whether or not the United States deserves any credit for eventually ending slavery after a bloody civil war. So I think that's just the state of the country right now.
Yeah, and you know, the reparations conversation, you could be for or against reparations in 2019 and be a reasonable person and sort of have a sensible debate. You should be able to, without question, point out that Katie Pavlich is wrong by both the letter and the spirit of what she's saying. It's embarrassing, and most importantly, it's a dumb point, because when the United States banned slavery, half the country didn't want to and thought that it was worth going to war over keeping slavery. Incredible, irrational ignorance happening on Fox News daily. Make sure to follow the David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. While you're there, follow me at david.pakman. Quick break, and we will talk to Denise Hearn next. It will be a very interesting conversation. We've now been taking pretty seriously for more than a year the topic of Donald Trump's possible cognitive decline and sort of fitness to be president of the United States. We recently had Dr. John Gartner, a psychiatrist from Johns Hopkins Medical Center, back on the program. He believes that Donald Trump is in some combination of a pre-dementia state combined with some cognitive limitation or disorder and possible personality disorders. We've been observing this kind of disordered speech and disordered thinking for a long time now. Ignorance combined with very confused attacks on people and things that don't really seem to make sense for a normal adult in a position of Donald, similar to that in which Donald Trump finds himself. And we have now growing concern, including even from Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway, who commented about this stuff over the weekend. We had a period of several hours over the weekend where Donald Trump went on a very unusual, even for his standard, spiral of idiocy that has brought forward even more concerns about the state of Donald Trump's mental health and sort of cognitive abilities. First, Donald Trump tweeted about a Saturday Night Live episode that wasn't even new. It was a rerun, but Donald Trump found himself angrily sort of responding to it on Twitter over the weekend, saying, quote, "It's truly incredible that shows like Saturday Night Live, not funny / no talent, can spend all of their time knocking the same person, me, over and over without so much of a mention of the other side, like an advertisement without consequences, same with late night shows." And of course, you know, this is notable for a couple of different reasons. The micro focus from this president on specific shows on Fox News, Saturday Night Live, Jimmy Kimmel, whoever, that's unusual to begin with. But even further, it's also not true what he's saying. The late night shows and Saturday Night Live will parody all sorts of different people. It may be that Donald Trump is particularly sort of thin-skinned, and so he's only impacted by or remembering the critiques or parodies of himself. And then he went on to attack the late Senator John McCain, who, of course, passed away of brain cancer just months ago, in a completely unintelligible tweet, but certainly an attack on John McCain. Quote, "So it was indeed just proven in court papers, quote, last in his class, parentheses, Annapolis John McCain, that sent the, quote, or the capitalized fake dossier to the FBI and capital M Media, hoping to have it printed before the capital E election. He and the Dems working together failed, parentheses, as usual. Even the capitalized fake news refused this garbage." Do you understand what he's saying here, Pat? Is the criticism that McCain had bad grades, thus his role in forwarding the Steele dossier is to be questioned or something like that?
We may have to go over the tweet a couple more times for me to fully understand it, because I'm just so lost by the syntax and the erroneous use of capitalization. Maybe we can go over it again?
Yeah, I truly don't understand it, and we probably need a full bonus show, actually, to figure out what that one meant, but extraordinarily weird. Then Trump started complaining about the weekend hosts on Fox News also slamming Shepard Smith, who, as I've pointed out before, is basically the lone voice of reason on Fox News during the week. You occasionally then will get Chris Wallace saying something remotely intelligible and logical on weekends. Donald Trump tweeting, again, the same barrage of tweets over the weekend. Were Fox News weekend anchors Arthur Neville and Leland Vittert trained by CNN prior to their ratings collapse? In any event, that's where they should be working, along with their lowest rated anchor, Shepard Smith. Of course, just hours before this tweet, Trump was tweeting positive things about Fox News. Go figure, not just yet another one of the contradictions. And then Trump demanded that crazy judge Jeanine Pirro be brought back on the air at Fox News after she was suspended over some comments that Fox understood to be Islamophobic. He went on a 3-tweet rant related to Jeanine Pirro, where he said, quote, "Bring back Judge Jeanine Pirro." The radical left Democrats, working closely with their beloved partner, the fake news media, is using every trick in the book to silence a majority of our capital C country. They have all-out campaigns against Fox News hosts who are doing too well. Fox must stay strong and fight back with vigor. Stop working so hard on being politically correct, which will only bring you down, and continue to fight our country. The losers all want what you have. Don't give it to them. Be strong and prosper. Be weak and die. Stay true to the people that got you there. Keep fighting for Tucker and fight. By the way, Tucker's fine, fighting for Tucker, and fight hard for Judge Jeanine. Your competitors are jealous. They all want what you've got. Number one, don't hand it to them on a silver platter. They can't beat you. You can only beat yourselves. It's almost like if an inspirational speaker lost all sense of what mattered and how to speak. This is what you would effectively end up with. And it's truly amazing how much attention Fox News gets from the president. I mean, that's a remarkable thing. The amount that the president is watching Fox News, the amount that the president is basing his public narrative and discourse on Twitter on what happens to be on Fox News when he turns it on, that he's making specific programming demands about bring back Jeanine and get rid of Leland Vittert, who, by the way, was the guy I appeared with when I was on Fox News. Very unusual stuff. And then at some point, I mean, no Trump Twitter rant is complete without criticizing the Mueller investigation, which he did do, saying, quote, report, Christopher Steele backed up his Democrat and crooked Hillary paid for fake and unverified dossier with information he got from, quote, send in watchers, end quote, of low rating CNN. This is the info that got us the witch hunt. And then he went on to reference some vague insurance policy that he believes Democrats have against him. I think he's mentioned this before, and he calls the multiple investigations against his possible crimes an insurance policy. He tweeted, quote, what the Democrats have done in trying to steal a presidential election, first at the ballot box, and then after that failed with the, quote, insurance policy, is the biggest capital S scandal in the history of our capital C country. So understandably, many more mental health professionals expressing concern as a result of this rant, even right-wingers expressing concern. Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway, saying that there's a mental condition here that applies and that it seems to be getting worse. Not that surprising, given that just last week, Trump was angry with autopilot on airplanes, raging against complicated aircraft. And I want to be clear, I don't think this is a funny thing that we laugh at. This is serious. It seems that something is truly sort of acutely wrong with the president of the United States. And at this point, there's one path out, and that's voting in 2020. Impeachment might be the right thing. And if it is, go ahead and try it. but it would take a long time. You need Republicans to be on board, and I don't think they're going to be. Removal under the 25th Amendment by the cabinet, justified at this point. Good luck making that a reality. So if you're sick of this, the path forward is vote the guy out, period, because we cannot count on Republicans to help us remove him. That would be necessary for impeachment. That would be necessary for removal under the 25th Amendment. It's voting in November of 2020, period. That is it, no matter what anybody else tells you. Let me know your reaction to this. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Follow us both, and we'll be right back after this. I was actually going to cover this story earlier in today's show, except then Trump's violent rhetoric was actually linked to a specific shooting, the one in New Zealand. But shortly before the shooting in New Zealand, Donald Trump issued the type of threat that we hear from authoritarian dictators about using the police and the military to crack down against political opponents, which is, of course, completely antithetical to everything that the United States stands for, or at least should stand for. This actually wasn't noticed for a few days. Donald Trump gave an interview to Breitbart. It was early last week, in fact. And at a certain point in this interview, he said supporters of his might get tough on people who oppose him politically. This includes the military, this includes the police, and this includes biker gangs. Now, I'm going to show you Breitbart's own transcript of what Trump said. This isn't a summary. This isn't some left-wing website rephrasing what Donald Trump said. This is Breitbart's transcript of what Donald Trump said. They conducted the interview. Donald Trump said, quote, "It's so terrible what's happening. You know, the left plays a tougher game. It's very funny. I actually think that the people on the right are tougher, but they don't play it tougher, okay?" So far, it's unintelligible, by the way. Trump goes on, "I can tell you, I have the support of the police, the support of the military, the support of the bikers for Trump. I have the tough people, and they don't play it tough until they go to a certain point, and then it would be very bad, very bad. But the left plays it cuter and tougher." So let's put aside for a second the New Zealand shooting that took place over the weekend. Even without that, we now have exactly the type of comment that we can add to Trump's subtle and sometimes not so subtle fomenting of political violence. Remember that in the United States, political violence exists almost exclusively by the right, okay? This is Trump sort of foreshadowing physical confrontations, I guess based on what he's saying, between left-wing protesters who are almost exclusively nonviolent and Donald Trump's biker gangs, as well as the military and the police. Now, you might say, hold on, David. Trump says police and military, but he doesn't mean that the police and military are going to enforce Trump's political views with violence. They are simply for law and order. If the left becomes violent in their opposition to Donald Trump, in come the military and the police, and they will simply enforce the law. Wrong, okay? That's a ridiculous defense. Police have a job to enforce the law, period. The fact that they support Trump politically, which Trump is bringing up, should have no place or importance in the fact that if people break the law, the police will step in. Now, as far as even mentioning the military is not supposed to be used for domestic law enforcement, period. There's something from 1878 called the Posse Comitatus Act, Comitatus, not exactly sure how it's pronounced, which limits the use of the federal government to use the military for domestic policy enforcement or domestic law enforcement. When Trump mentions even the possibility of using the military in this way, it's outrageous. And once again, once you talk about, as Trump says, the military is on his side, you're wading into very dangerous and possibly illegal territory. And I was thinking, Pat, if you look at who uses the military to enforce their political positions, it's not good company. It's exactly the authoritarian types that we're concerned Trump is so impressed and enamored with.
Yeah, this absolutely sounds to me like a veiled threat. It's kind of like Trump saying, I could beat you up if I wanted to, but I'm going to show restraint and I'm not going to. I certainly hope it never comes to this. I hope we never see the police and the military and the biker gangs fighting against the people. But if there is ever a time that it gets to that, it may be if Trump loses the election and wants to fight back in some way, doesn't want to go down. And I hope it never gets to that. But I think we're going to talk about that a little later in the show.
Yeah, we are. And we've talked about that before, and we will talk about it again. And just to finalize, so we've got the police and the military, then the biker gangs. We're now kind of getting into the realm of the absurd. But Vladimir Putin has actually used a Russian nationalist biker gang called the Night Wolves, who are funded in part by the Kremlin, to do all sorts of political stuff in Russia. It's really vile. It probably impresses Donald Trump. And once again, these comments, I won't re-explain what stochastic terrorism is, but these are the types of comments that would fall under the umbrella of stochastic terrorism, publicly demonizing or threatening a person or group, which statistically makes it likely that someone will go and act out what it is that is being suggested, in this case, political violence by biker gangs, the police and military against the political opponents of Donald Trump. Strump, that's an interesting one. Very dangerous stuff. And I want to hear from you about it. What is your reaction in terms of Trump's rhetoric to the New Zealand shooting? What is your reaction to Donald Trump's thinly veiled threats to use the police and the military and biker gangs to crack down on political opponents? By the way, political opponents that Trump hasn't even said are violent. I mean, we know that most of Trump's political opponents aren't violent. The political violence is coming from the right. Trump's not even saying that this would be in response to violence. He's saying this would be against his political opponents. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Follow me. Let me know what you think, and we'll follow up on it later in the week. I have a very strange new video that suggests Donald Trump either doesn't know where Brazil is, doesn't know what NATO is, or maybe the most likely scenario is both. He doesn't know where Brazil is, and he doesn't know what NATO is and how it actually works. So let's step back and I'll set it up for you. Donald Trump's view on NATO and his relationship to NATO has been erratic and frayed, maybe is how I would put it. Sometimes NATO is, quote, as bad as NAFTA to Donald Trump. Other times Trump says he supports it. Other times he says it's time for everybody to start paying their fair share in terms of what they vaguely committed to contribute to NATO. That gets us to yesterday, where Donald Trump welcomed the new extremist right-wing president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, to the White House, and they gave a very bizarre news conference during which the new Brazilian president talked about gender and sexuality. And at one point, Trump kind of reacted sort of oddly. Wasn't clear if he was smirking or exactly what his expression was. But there's another moment from this press conference which isn't getting the attention that it should. And it's exactly about what I started talking about, Brazil and NATO. NATO, of course, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, NATO. It involves North America on one side of the Atlantic Ocean and Europe on the other side of the Northern Atlantic Ocean. Brazil is, of course, in South America, but Trump suggested that maybe one day Brazil could be a non-NATO ally or maybe a NATO ally. And as usual, almost unintelligible from Donald Trump, but indicative of serious confusion or ignorance, or both, by Donald Trump. Check out this very strange video and listen to the words that Donald Trump says.
As I told President Bolsonaro, I also intend to designate Brazil as a major non-NATO ally, or even possibly, if you start thinking about it, maybe a NATO ally. Have to talk to a lot of people, but maybe a NATO ally, which will greatly advance security and cooperation between our countries.
He's just so dumb, isn't he? Let's discuss the possibilities of what this might mean. Possibility number one is Trump is just confused about what it means to be a non-NATO ally and a NATO ally. Non-NATO ally already means an ally of NATO countries that is not actually part of NATO, which Brazil could be, okay? Then you have NATO ally, which actually means part of NATO, but maybe in Trump's mind, NATO ally means an ally of NATO countries. Like, in other words, maybe Trump imagines that NATO ally is actually what non-NATO ally of NATO means. And I know I'm kind of being confusing, and it's because I'm trying to untangle what confusion is very evident in Donald Trump's mind. Now, if Trump actually wants Brazil to be part of NATO, if that's actually what he means, all of NATO needs to be rewritten, since it says only European countries plus the United States or Canada can join. The last possibility, and this is kind of the wackiest, most cartoonish, is that Trump thinks Brazil is in Europe and therefore eligible for NATO membership. I don't know. Hilariously, after this proclamation was made, NATO was asked about it, and they said, go talk to United States authorities. They wanted nothing whatsoever to do with trying to parse what Donald Trump meant here. So that's we've sort of gotten the cartoonish, hilarious stuff out of the way. Let's now discuss the really important things here. Number one, the more Trump talks about NATO, the more we realize he doesn't understand it, which makes it really dangerous and disturbing that he so often is talking about NATO and criticizing NATO without even really understanding it, as has become extraordinarily clear. The second issue that is of significant concern is that, once again, look at who Trump wants in NATO. Brazil is now headed up by yet another one of these authoritarian sort of dictator wannabes who Trump is always so impressed by. And all of a sudden, Trump says, we want Brazil in NATO, despite the fact that they're in South America and are outside of the operating treaty as it is written. So we're going from bad to worse. Trump not knowing the geography of Brazil. It's funny. It goes along with everything we know about Trump. The real concerns are, as soon as you get another authoritarian type in Brazil, Trump immediately wants to pull them into NATO. And that's actually a much broader concern. Which do you think it is? Do you think Trump doesn't understand NATO? Do you think Trump doesn't know where Brazil is on a map? Do you think it's both or something else? Let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Okay, we have heard from Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe, who is sounding the alarm that he believes Donald Trump is not going to leave the presidency peacefully in 2020 and might specifically use bogus national emergency declarations to justify his reelection as a sort of October surprise type of thing. So let's step back before we get into Lawrence Tribe's comments and kind of think about the context for a moment. There was discussion when Barack Obama was president of Obama declaring martial law to prevent the 2016 election from happening and to stay in power indefinitely. There was the idea of Barack Obama, I don't even know, not holding the 2016 election in some other way or using some kind of arcane legal mechanism to try to become president for life. Now, it was ridiculous. There was no merit to any of those accusations. Barack Obama had never said anything of the sort. Barack Obama did not have authoritarian tendencies. Under Donald Trump, on the other hand, we're hearing similar allegations, the difference being that Trump does have a pattern in history of those authoritarian tendencies, particularly related to the fairness of elections. Barack Obama never suggested that president for life would be nice, which is something that Donald Trump has said. Donald Trump has talked about Hillary Clinton getting 3 million illegal votes, started a voter integrity commission, election integrity commission, to look into it with no evidence. It found no evidence, but Donald Trump was willing to spend untold amount of money in order to do that. Donald Trump refused to say that he would accept election results that showed he lost to Hillary Clinton in 2016. He has other authoritarian tendencies that we've discussed, not directly related to elections. We've seen over the last few weeks some of his flunkies, like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, start to float the idea that Trump could only lose via some kind of voter or election fraud or foul play in 2020, which is, of course, an indefeasible argument. You can't possibly argue against that if someone is asserting that. Michael Cohen said he's worried that Donald Trump will not relinquish control of the Oval Office if indeed he loses in 2020. We've already done a segment talking about how it's unlikely in practice that it would actually be allowed to happen by the military and by law enforcement. But all of these ideas relate to ways that one might hypothetically illegally seize power or refuse to relinquish it. Lawrence Tribe brings us a different idea. The idea Lawrence Tribe presented on MSNBC over the weekend is that Donald Trump, we know he's willing to declare bogus national emergencies over things that are not actually emergencies or crises, the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border being our example right now. Donald Trump, Lawrence Tribe suggests, would use a bogus national emergency declaration to create a type of fear that would maybe get him reelected in November of 2020. That's the idea. Here is Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe saying it himself.
We can't count on his being voted out of office in 2020. He is sufficiently corrupt and will probably have enough help from not too friendly foreign powers, Russia, Saudi Arabia, maybe Turkey, so that we can't count on removing this guy by an election. And in fact, he may fabricate yet another so-called national emergency to influence that election. What we have to do is persistently gather the facts.
Right. So what he is saying is not that it would be an illegal seizure of the White House or a refusal to accept the results. He's saying Trump could use bogus national emergencies to get reelected. And of course, in a country where half the country doesn't vote, half the population doesn't vote, and so many people are voting based on incorrect understandings of the world around them, it's not only plausible, but it's extraordinarily feasible to actually do. Now, any president could do this, right? Any president, as their first term is nearing an end, and with a re-election in doubt, could do it. But I believe, Pat, that it's different with Trump because he has a history of having no problem lying about what even constitutes an emergency. Many presidents exaggerate the seriousness of situations, but Donald Trump has created some of this whole cloth, including with the U.S.-Mexico border. And importantly, we know that Trump supporters and his base will 100% uncritically accept whatever emergency declaration Trump makes. So I think that this is a more likely scenario that Lawrence Tribe points out. Not that Trump will illegally refuse to leave the Oval Office, but that he will engineer some kind of false situation to justify his reelection, which will work.
Yeah, I think this is more of an interesting conversation. Sometimes we do talk about if Trump will willingly vacate the Oval Office if he does lose the election. And I often think that that is putting the cart before the horse. Like, we have to find out if he's actually going to lose the election first. We have to have the election, and we should focus on that. But if he prematurely declares a national emergency, knowing that it's going to garner him some support, may put him over the top, then I do think we have to actually think about it. What that emergency would be, on the other hand, I don't know. Is it going to be something more like a false flag? Or is it going to be him making a mountain out of a molehill like he did with this last one on immigration?
Well, the most important consideration, no matter what it would be, is that Trump can't do any of this stuff without Republican support, or at least Republican indifference. Because if Donald Trump does fabricate any kind of bogus emergency, if Republicans don't allow it, right, it's not veto proof. If Trump declares a bogus emergency and the House and Senate vote it down, and Trump vetoes that vote, that veto can be overridden if, and this is the important if, Republicans decide they're not going to allow Trump to use national emergencies to try to get himself reelected. At this point, the Republican Party has demonstrated itself to be so corrupt that they are likely to allow Donald Trump to do whatever because of so-called party unity or because a Democrat would be worse or whatever specious justification they come up with. So I think that this is a much greater danger than the sort of cartoonish Trump barricades himself in the Oval Office and refuses to leave. Okay, let's talk about some of the promises that have been made by the current president of the United States. Some of the promises that Donald Trump made obviously were not going to be kept. So the classic is we're going to build a wall across the entire U.S.-Mexico border and Mexico is going to pay for it. Only an extraordinarily ignorant or gullible person would have believed that. And of course, it hasn't happened. But there are a lot of other promises that are a little more nuanced in thinking about how they have not been kept. And on Daily Kos, there's a really good article by John Purr about this. And there's a lot to debate here about which are the most obviously bogus promises that Donald Trump made and which are more embarrassing internationally versus which are more embarrassing domestically. But we'll just pick a few of them just to think about. So one big promise from Trump was he's not going to cut Social Security. He's not going to cut Medicare. He made this promise many, many times. I will point you to just one example, a tweet from May of 2015, where he said, I was the first and only potential Republican candidate to state there will be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Huckabee copied me. That was not true. The new budget, which I told you about last week that has been proposed by Donald Trump, cuts Social Security by $25 billion. It cuts Medicare by $575 billion over the next decade. Pathetic, embarrassing. I hope that people hold Trump accountable for that, even if Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate don't allow it to become the reality of the U.S. budget. Trump claimed many times that his tax plan would pay for itself. The idea was, yes, cutting taxes significantly for the rich and corporations will, in the short run, decrease government tax revenue. But it will be so good for the economy, it will be so stimulative for the economy that in the long run, it will increase tax revenue and pay for itself. The reality is this isn't happening. Trump has blown up the deficit to record levels. The budget is not going to balance under Donald Trump as president. There obviously is no tax cut that is paying for itself in even 1 year, never mind the long term. The tax plan Trump claimed would cost him a fortune. That's not true. Now, of course, he hasn't released his tax returns, so we don't know the full scope of how he was impacted by his tax plan. But it's very clear that if he's paying any federal income taxes, depending on what loss carryovers he's using and other mechanisms, his federal tax rate went down thanks to his tax plan. There's no way around it. Claims about growth. Donald Trump claimed that the U.S. economy would be at 4% annual economic growth, maybe even 5%. He might have even at one point suggested the idea of 6% in a year GDP growth. Now, we can debate whether that was even reasonable from the get-go. We can debate whether 4, 5, or 6% GDP growth is even a good thing over the long term. What we can't debate is that it hasn't happened. We recently got the 2018 GDP growth numbers, and they were in the high 2s, not 4%. Trump said he would eliminate the national debt over a period of 8 years. In order to do that, you need a surplus. You need to start using the surplus to chip away at the national debt so you can eventually get it to zero over 8 years. I mean, just forget about it. That's never happening. And in fact, Donald Trump is adding to the debt at record speed. You can debate whether it matters. You can debate how worried we should be about the deficit and paying off the debt. What you can't argue about is that Trump promised to pay it off, and he's doing the opposite. One other example, everybody will have health insurance. It's going to be beautiful. Obamacare will be gone. We'll put in place something else. Everybody will have health insurance. It's not happening. Okay, the uninsured rate is up 13.7%, up to 13.7% last quarter. And this also relates to one of these promises that maybe gets less attention. Remember, Trump said trade wars are good and easy to win. He's losing the current trade war with China. Trade deficit with China has grown, not shrunk. The revised NAFTA deal is mostly stuff that was already under negotiation when President Obama was president. It's combined with some new ideas that wouldn't really do much even if passed. So the real question for me, Pat, is which of these promises not kept are most embarrassing internationally? And then most importantly, are Trump supporters going to hold him accountable for any of these promises not kept? Or will they merely say it's because of Democrats that he hasn't been able to do it?
I was wondering that too. Like, will these failed attempts at keeping his promises cause him to maybe lose re-election? And I don't think that they're really going to hurt him. I mean, any other politician, it probably would. You have to make an effort to fulfill your campaign promises. And maybe Trump, he has made the efforts, but he's been stopped sometimes because of his own undoing, sometimes because Democrats have blocked him. But at any rate, I think his supporters are going to blame this on Democrats and say that he tried to do what he could and just failed at the end of the day. But they'll still support him for the re-election.
I tend to agree. I've seen no evidence. I mean, listen, every once in a while we get a call from a Trumpist and they say, this is the really important issue and I need Trump to do it. And every single time that I've pressed them and said, okay, so if Trump doesn't do it, like there was one guy who was talking about the wall, are you not voting for him in 2020? and they back off immediately and they say, well, no, I mean, listen, I'm not going to vote for a Democrat. So that's exactly the attitude that makes it not make a difference. Trump seems to have this completely immutable, unwavering base of support. It seems to be potentially as high as 35, 32%, that just no matter what the guy does, even if he proverbially or literally shoots someone on Fifth Avenue, will not abandon him. So what this gets us back to? I know I'm a broken record at this point. You've got to vote. That's it. Okay. Trump's base is not going to say it's time for him to go. Republicans don't appear to be ready or even remotely interested in considering saying it's time for Trump to go. Yes, Bill Weld is going to run against Trump, and John Kasich might run in the primary, and you've got a handful of Republicans. But big picture, Republicans in the Senate aren't going to vote to remove him. His cabinet is not going to remove him under the 25th Amendment. So the only solution is to vote in 2020. We don't know for who yet. We are working our way through these early stages of the Democratic primary, but if you're not voting in November of 2020, it is a tacit acceptance of Donald Trump remaining as president of the United States. I know I won't be doing that, and I'm going to be lobbying everybody in the audience hard not to allow that to happen either. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. While you're there, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Some pictures. Oh, this is actually kind of interesting. Over the weekend, I was in Washington, D.C., and at a restaurant, really nice restaurant, our waiter said, hey, I watched the David Pakman Show, and I took a picture with him, and it's up on my Instagram account at david.pakman. Check it out after the break. What happens to your brain when you quit Facebook, even for just a month? A very interesting study gives us at least some of the answers to that question. So as many of you know, when we made our studio move several months ago, we redesigned the look of the David Pakman Show studio. And in so preparing, I spoke to different people, including Sam Seder of the Majority Report. And one of the things I talked to Sam about is how he set up the paneling that's behind him. And I purchased the same style panel to be behind me. And we integrated into the set with a television and sort of different coloring and lighting and blah, 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 blah. So recently, someone during one of my live streams on YouTube sent a super chat asking about it. And then that person called into Sam Seder's show, The Majority Report, and asked him about my comment about it. And Sam played my answer to the question about it. We're now like 3 levels of Inception deep. And it's really funny. Take a listen to this. Stephen Robbins says, is it true that you literally asked Sam Seder how to build his set before you copied it? Yes, I did. I mean, the difference is I've set it up. I've combined our old set, which has this screen behind me, with similar paneling. I mean, basically what I copied was I asked him, how did he build the panels? And he told me. And I'm curious, that I've said that Sam helped me with what I needed to buy, but did he, like, if someone called him and asked him about that, I would be interested in seeing that. That sounds pretty fun. Let me know if that's the case.
So Pakman's going to cut this segment and comment on this segment, and then what we're going to do is we're going to cut the segment that he comments on this segment, and that's basically going to be our business, the plans.
Yeah.
For
That's exactly right. So now I'm commenting on this segment. Let me make clear, lest anyone be confused. Our set is still in progress, so more changes are still forthcoming. But there's a much funnier part of this segment, actually, on Sam's show, which is that caller who called in to Sam's show to talk about the set piece, the set element. He called and sort of complained to Sam, or I guess was kind of like incredulous about the fact that during my YouTube live streams, people send in paid questions for me to answer through something called Super Chat. I find this part hilarious. He just seems totally incredulous that people would do that.
So I turn it on, and he's reading questions, like comments and questions, but they're these YouTube Super Chats that you have to pay for.
right.
And these questions are just pouring in, like $10 a pop. People are asking him, like, what do you think about Cory Booker? and somebody paid like $10 to get him to answer that.
Right. Okay.
It's
well, we have a super chat too, and people do that. I mean,
This is just this may be my favorite Majority Report clip ever. The guy just can't believe that the super chats are pouring in during my live streams. And then the caller is angry not only about super chats, but about the fact that sometimes we'll have a new member goal during live streams before I take phone calls on the live stream.
Ron Reagan, how much would you like to pay me to respond to what you're saying?
Well, hold on. I'm getting to the good part.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So he says that he has a phone number, that he's going to take calls, but that he won't do it until he gets 10 new subscribers, 10 new patrons or whatever.
I like
members.
This is interesting.
And so he's got a gun to the phones.
Well,
and he's holding them hostage.
Right.
Saying, and guess what? He got there very quickly. And it just seems like you're leaving a lot of money on the table, my guy. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I mean, so what should I do? Like, it's say, like, we're going to have, if we get 10 members, I'm going to start answering the phones today. We should do that every day. Like, we haven't got 10 new members.
So this is just the best. So now we're going to create a never-ending nested loop of comments on each other's segments about the set. It's going to be sort of like those Russian dolls or the movie Inception. Someone super chatted me to ask about Sam's set. Then they called Sam's show to talk to Sam about it. Sam played my clip in order to respond to the call about the super chat on my channel about Sam's set. Now I'm responding to Sam's comment about a caller's comment about a caller's super chat about my build out of the set, which resembles Sam's set. And then, of course, tonight, Pat, the progressive voice known as the Progressive TMZ on YouTube, will comment on the entire thing, and then it'll all sort of start over tomorrow.
Well, there is a lot to comment on here, and you did promise me that no one was going to notice that you copied Sam's set, so I'm a little worried about the fallout here. I don't know where this is going to end up, but I'm not prepared for another 5 or 6 response videos. I don't think the show is prepared either.
No, well, I'm actually hiring Rudy Giuliani to represent me on this matter on TV shows because he's just so good at talking people out of awkward situations. So he will now be talking about this going forward. By the way, later today, I'm going to be asking Sam for his social security and bank account numbers just so I can figure out how those work before I start using my own as well. So many more exciting segments to talk about.